Good to have.
All right, everybody, we are live. Sorry, Martin was saying something in between and we went live. So, yeah, Martin, you were saying something, but before you say something, I think let me welcome our audience. Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? I hope good. And we have a very interesting topic, actually, very on vogue topic for tonight, basically. Martin, I'm getting a feedback from your side. Sorry. Yeah, so this is a pretty interesting topic and on vogue topic, and as you guys know, there's this Muslim apologist by the name, and it's a very famous. So I'm pretty sure you guys all know him. He's a convert to Islam from probably Greek Catholicism or Greek Orthodox Christianity, something like that, by the name of Hamza Tzortzis, and he has been an active, you know. Apologetics guy in the scenario, and probably a couple few years back he tweeted something, and recently he tweeted and he said that whatever I said in those earlier years about apostasy or irtada as is called in Arabic, or ridda basically, and he took those stances back and said, no, I completely comply with whatever the rulings by the traditional Orthodox Islamic scholars are, and I align with them. And so today's stream is basically going to deal with that tweet, what was said, what were the inconsistencies, and what are the problems that could arise because of his new stance, and what we perceive it as basically from as an outsider, basically. And most of us, as you know, have known Hamza for a long time, as in at least in the apologetics scenario. Sorry, Madin, I had to stop you while you were saying something, right? Go ahead, please. How are you doing, by the way?
I'm good. I'm good. No, it's all right. It wasn't anything important. I think we should just proceed with this particular stream. I think first and foremost, what we should be doing is, and I said first and foremost, particularly because that's Hamza's line, right? If you recall, in this past, he was uh, a religious user of the first and foremost expression. So maybe that's just me, because we're thinking about Hamza today. It's just circulating in my mind. But what we should be doing primarily here is, I think, look into what exactly Hamza meant first back in the day. Maybe that was 2013, 2014, 2015, regarding the apostasy punishment, and then compare and contrast it with today's view and what that means.
Yeah, Mahadan, a very apt point. And I tried to, sorry for interrupting you. And you're correct, but I tried to look for whatever his stance was back then, and I couldn't find a tweet. So I'm not sure if you have that tweet or somebody has that tweet. If somebody knows that stance, then that'll be a great help, basically. Yeah. And I totally agree with your point, by the way.
I think the last time I heard about Hamza's view on something like that was probably on the Magic Sandwich show or something like that, where he was directly asked about. I think again, my memory might be failing me, and he was directly asked about the apostasy punishment, and he responded that there is no punishment, there is no such punishment for merely leaving the religion. It's when you leave the religion and then fight against society, right? So when you leave the religion and then fight against society, and he kind of implies or indicates that this may involve military or violent means of resistance, or spreading of one's views or something like that. So
All right,
something.
so there is a, yeah, that's what I'm saying, because there are so many nuances in that stance. Basically, when you say fight, so that's a very different stance that could be, categorized as probably treason in terms of against a state. If you consider Islamic state to be a state, basically whose policies are governed by Islam, right? Versus something like spreading something, some different worldview by means of just by very soft means, basically non-violent means, basically. Now, so that's the point. I'm not quite sure whether he took that to be a violent fight against the state, to be proper definition for apostasy, or even spreading your worldview, which is against Islam, as being apostasy. So this is something that there are minute points basically about those two stances, right?
Yeah, so we don't know exactly what he meant then, but I think it was the way he defended it. It made it seem like when he used the words "fight against," that he was at least trying to make it sound like it's a violent encounter, a violent resistance, some sort of violence, not just persuasion or protest or dissemination of ideas or activism, but some sort of belligerence, hostility, violence, physical force. And the reason I interpret it like that is because he used the word fight, and from memory again, he seemed to have been trying to dispel the backwardness of the rule, right? The medieval nature of the rule, by saying that it's actually a little bit more. It requires more than just conscientious deconversion from Islam or changing of one's mind. It's not just an attack against ideas. It's an attack against a person who has gone and now fighting against society violently. That's how I interpret him. But okay, maybe he was saying it was a violent, non-violent protest. That's what he meant, and that would also be considered apostasy. What's
Exactly.
now?
Yeah, that's what my point is. Probably he, not quite sure. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
I mean,
so,
there's a
so,
marked difference between these two
yeah.
positions,
So,
basically.
whilst I interpret it in the former sense, it could be interpreted in the latter sense as well, but we don't necessarily completely know. But question is, how has his modern day stance changed, and how does it differ from that? So, do you have any? Do you have any? Do you have his modern day stance apparent? Can it be put on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
screen?
I have the tweets tweets from him, basically, right? So, can you see them on the screen?
One minute. Let me put my glasses on actually, because it's too small.
Right. So, let me just
Yeah.
zoom it in a little bit, right? Can you see it now? Better? Slight bit, just slight bit, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, do you want to read it out?
So yeah, I'll just read it out basically, right? So this is from Hamza Andreas Tzortzis, basically important clarification and apology. So he writes, over 10 years ago, I made a statement about the had for rida. Basically, had is a what do you call the had is a Arabic word for limit. Basically, something you cross the limits, basically, right? This is just for audience, Madin. You know all these terms, basically, right? So just for audience's understanding, rida is basically irtada or apostasy, basically. So he writes, I made a statement about the had for rida that was incorrect. I described the had and explained it in the wrong way. I have retracted those statements in the past, and I reiterate now for the sake of clarity and 100% transparency. I apologize for this mistake, and I want to make it very clear that I fully believe in, support, and defend all Islamic laws, including the had for rida, segregation of the sexes, hudud in general, etc. I believe in these laws as per the understanding of traditional Orthodox Islam, based on the understanding of the pious predecessors and the four schools of thought, basically. You know, I believe in no Islam is morally and intellectually superior to any other way of life. I believe Islam is a mercy for all people. Most of my life's work has revolved around this belief, and this is the essence of our work at Sapiens Institute, and blah, 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 blah. I believe that we must convey Islam to the world with wisdom, mercy, and confidence, right? So this is his basically stance. He basically says that he aligns with the traditional understanding or traditional orthodox understanding of Islam, basically based on the understanding of the predecessors, basically, right? And as much as my memory serves, Madin, all four schools, basically all four madhabs, basically Malaki, Hanafi, Shafi, and Hanbali, I think all four declare apostasy to be a hudud crime, basically, which means capital punishment for it, basically death penalty, right? So that's my understanding. I might be wrong about it. Maybe one of these schools doesn't say that, but as far as I remember, all 4 schools agree on it, basically, that apostasy is punishable by death, basically, in an Islamic rule state, basically.
Yeah, I mean, what I would go think that is then what conditions and what stipulations apply, because Hamza stands. If I was correct to describe him earlier as one where he thought that going and fighting against society, whether that means literally fighting or not, then you are able to merit, or if you want to use the word demerit, the punishment of apostasy or punishment of death. How does the 4 schools differ in respect to that? Because, as far as I remember, that they didn't require any opposition to society. It didn't require that. It just required a full knowledge without any doubt, shred of doubt, but from most witnesses, that this person has changed his mind on Islam and he's denounced the religion. He's given something like 3 days, or if I recall,
It's given 3 days, yeah, basically.
Retract, repent, change his mind, right? And if he doesn't, then he gets maybe I missed out on one or 2 ingredients there, but he usually gets the punishment. There's no requirement that he has to go and go against society or try to convert people to his new religion or non-atheism, whatever it is, or that he hates Islam or is anti-Islamic or is spreading Islamophobia or is being violent. None of those requirements are necessary. That's what I recall to be the traditional Orthodox.
No, there's no such requirement, and you got it right, exactly, because all it needs for these for him or her to be punished under this law is just that he has now stopped believing in Islam, basically. And then, as you said, all 4 madhabs, as far as I remember, maybe there are some minor differences between the time given for him to repent or take back his apostasy, but usually it's 3 days. What do you call the time is given for him to repent, and if he or she does not, then the death penalty is applied on him or her, basically. So yeah, I think between just a moment, Madan, I think Mukhali has tried to correct me on Had for Rida means legal punishment for apostasy. Basically, yes. I mean, I was just getting into nitty-gritties of the definitions of what the words mean, but you're right. I mean, taken together, that's what we have been dealing with, basically punishment for apostasy, right? All right, Madan, you were in the middle of going through it. Something. Shall we open the other tweet of him? Basically, he's so from this tweet we don't really get much.
Before we do that, let's just comment on something else. So if you notice in this piece of writing, right, it's ironic because he's trying to say that I reiterate now for the sake of clarity and 100% transparency, I apologize for this mistake, and I want to make it very clear that I fully believe and support and defend all these laws, right, including the Had Rida. And the irony is that he doesn't expand or elaborate or explain what that even means, right? Segregation of sexes, the hudud in general, yes, but he doesn't explain what his position is. The fact that we're here trying to interpret, clarify, understand what the orthodox rules are means that he's not been fully 100% transparent. And then, as he's saying, what is the Had for Rida? What does that even mean? I mean, we may know that, but his audience members, especially the Western audience, if they are watching, the onlookers, the lack of, is people who are not very familiar with Islam, and so on and so forth, or people who might think this is very, very, to be a barbaric idea or a medieval idea, they're not going to notice this. And the whole point is, it seems to be again, I can't 100% know what he was doing here, but seems to be purposefully concealed in this sort of jargon, Islamic jargon, right? So he doesn't have to expand on what he's actually saying, right? Because he's saying here that he believes in the punishment for people who leave Islam, and that punishment is death. And the conditions for that punishment are, as I've already outlined. It doesn't require violence. It doesn't require going against the state. It doesn't require the dissemination of anti-Islamic ideas. So it just requires knowledge of the fact that this person has left Islam. It could be a public announcement or vocal renunciation, and general certainty. There's a high standard for the certainty. Maybe some schools may differ.
I
Other
think
than that,
we're gonna come to those points, basically how much of a certainty it is, and what are probably the requirements. Maybe I think we'll get to those
the
points.
point is he's not said this out loud. Why?
Yeah, I agree totally. He has not given any clue as to all he has given is this, that pointed to these traditional Orthodox Islam and the understanding of the pious predecessors. And now, which one are of these pious predecessors he's talking about? Is he talking about the earlier scholars of all the four madhab, or even before those scholars, basically? But in general, even if let's say, let's be charitable and give him the benefit of the doubt, I think as much as my understanding is, all four madhabs agree on this capital punishment, and even the Shias agree on this punishment, basically, right? So let's assume it's like this ruling is pretty much spread wide pretty much within the Sunni and Shia
Yeah.
Islam, pretty much, right?
Yeah. So whatever the case, they agree that apostasy is to be punished. And my point here is that is he deliberately hiding that mentioning of that because it's so controversial, and it will lead him in hot water amongst many different political factions, groups, even amongst Muslims themselves? Is he just trying to appeal to the very orthodox Islamic crowd that has condemned him for being more progressive minded in his earlier years in order to try to water down the more controversial parts? And now he's finally become emboldened enough and courageous enough to now
Caught up with the idea, pretty much, right?
caught up with the idea, given that there's been a bit of a minimal resurgence of right-wing understandings of things. I
Yeah.
would say very young, but I don't know what motivation is making him say it now, or is just So is he just trying to therefore appeal to that political base, his orthodox political base, whilst also being, whilst also not being as transparent as possible, so that it's not as conspicuous as possible amongst the left-wing Muslims and left-wing
The liberals, basically trying to
yeah.
maintain a good standing between the liberals, at the same time maintain a good understanding between the more radicals as well. Pretty much. More, I think radical would be a wrong term. Probably more orthodox would be a right term to use, right? So he's trying to kind of balance between the two, basically appear good between among all of them, pretty much, right?
Mhm.
All right, we have a guest here. Kali Pulau, how are you doing?
I am good, guys. Sorry for being late.
As
Bit
always.
my end. Yeah.
He's finishing his pulao, I think. Right?
All right.
Yeah. Had
All
that been
right.
the case, I would have delayed my, dinner. But yeah, unfortunately, that wasn't the case.
All right. All right. Kali, so I don't know if you heard us talk
Yeah, I
about
was
this.
listening
So
to you
far,
guys.
we've been just.
I was listening to you. I was able to listen, but not able to join.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you know it all pretty much as of now.
Exactly.
So we are just trying to discuss the motivations that he might have had, and
Hmm.
the things that he has not been transparent about, as Mahajan said,
Exactly.
which he should have been, basically, which
He should
pretty
have
much,
been.
yeah.
I think I think to me it's quite obvious what he's trying to do. He's trying to appeal. He's trying to get his message across to the people to whom it actually matters. That that he stays with the orthodox understandings and rulings, and therefore he used the word had of rida, which is a very technical way of talking about punishment for apostasy. Even Muslims might not be able to understand what does they might understand what had means, but the at least the Western Muslim would not many of them would not understand the word had. And even the even non-Western Muslims might not understand the word rida. So the had of rida, it might not be even clear to majority of people who might be reading this tweet. What does that mean? Unless it is made clear to them. And I think
Yeah, that's why
what
I
ended up
think
happening is, yeah.
that's why I try
And I
to
think that's
explain
very
these terms.
deliberate.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
not be
yeah.
very charitable. I don't want to be charitable, particularly in this when it comes to the topic
This
about the
particular
punishment for
issue, right?
apostasy. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
I
I
don't think
agree.
there's any need to be charitable. This is a very deliberate attempt from him to try to sneakily, without trying to stay, without ruffling up the water. What do you call it? No, I'm not sure, but yeah,
Ruffling up the feathers.
ruffling up the feathers. Yeah. Without doing that, he wanted to get his message across and tried to sort of show his loyalty to the what do you call it, the
Orthodox.
Orthodox Muslims, yes, and the
Yeah,
conservative Muslims. So I
right,
think, yeah,
right.
that's what his purpose was. But I think it ended up getting quite viral, and a lot of people started talking about it, and a lot of people explained what he was trying to say, and that's why he had to make another tweet about it. So I guess, I mean, I don't think his purpose was served, but I think his intention is quite clear.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Because who the heck says had of rida?
Exactly.
In this modern day and
Who
age,
the hell says?
especially
Who
if you
the
can
hell
say
talks about it, this topic in
yeah,
this way? Yes.
yeah. I mean, especially if you can say segregation of sexes, and instead he's not used any wording like that for that, and everybody knows about the apostasy punishment. It's like a common, topic that people talk about, think about when they think about Islam. So it's very obvious that he could have just used the normal language that people talk in, particularly when he does that anyway for everything else. But in this situation, he concealed it with euphemism. Right? That's what it seems like. And yeah, that what does that suggest about him? Is he trying to be strategic? Is he not courageous enough? Is there a problem with his faith? Right? Because if he had a different position before, it could be that there was a problem with either his faith or his public courage to defend the more difficult ideas within Islam amongst the Western audience, right? Henceforth, he bends. Did he used to bend to the whims of the Western crowd, and is he still doing that to some extent now when he's trying to announce his real view now, either a changed view or the real view? I don't know. So what does that suggest? Well, maybe he's not. He's
I
not
think
scared. Yeah, maybe he's just. He
I think
knows.
he's aligning more with the orthodoxy of the, you know, uh, because he needs to appeal to them rather than to the more liberals. Basically, liberals will probably, just say a few things and then they'll be done with it. The orthodoxy won't leave him alone pretty much on this stance pretty much, and that's why I'm thinking that he has chosen this stance to appease to them basically, and stay unclear about it so that even the
Why?
liberals think that
Yeah.
he
Well, is that due to political strategy, or do you think that's due to courage?
it's just
Well,
it's just what you would call in again in technical Islamic jargon, the hikmah of doing dawa, of giving dawa, right? So you should give dawa, or you should talk about things in a very what you'd call a very wise way, so that it doesn't uh, you know m- what you'd call
get in the way
hinder
of your
anyone. Yeah,
get in the
exactly. Get
way
in the
of
way of
your
your dawa. Yeah, get in the
dawah
way of their
basically.
dawa towards their Western audience. So he wanted
Exactly.
to get his message across, but with least amount of resistance or
Controversy, yeah,
backlash
controversy.
on this
Yeah,
topic.
but
Exactly.
yeah.
Least amount
yeah.
of controversy. That's what he wanted to do. That's what his
On that,
intention would be. I think that's what his intention was.
yeah, maybe so. On that view, it's probably more to do with political strategy. Dawah
Exactly.
strategy.
I would.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. I think that's what it is. I don't see that there's any other reason for that.
Mm. Perhaps so. Yeah. So, do you want to, Philo? Do you want to go to his? So, what prompted his further elaboration? Do you know? Is there any
I
posts or
think,
comments?
yeah. I think his further elaboration was prompted by. See, he would have been,
Yeah.
attacked by more liberals or new converts, basically. So one such liberal, you can say, is Professor Gabriel Reynolds, basically Gabriel Said Reynolds, basically. And I haven't read what he has written, but what he has probably replied to him on this tweet would be apparent when we read Hamza's second tweet, basically, right? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that tweet on the screen, and
So
let's go through it basically.
yeah, and before that, just to respond to Mahadan, so there was a lot of response on this tweet. It's just not this Dr. Gabriel. I think that a lot of YouTubers actually talked about this tweet. They made videos about this. There was a lot of response, I think, even on Twitter, or I mean on X. So I think that's why he had to then, sort of come up with further clarification on this tweet.
Okay.
Yes,
That's
exactly right. So here's the next. Yeah, here's that tweet. I totally agree. I mean, he would have got a lot of backlash, or probably replies, responses from the liberal section of the you know um, uh, you know uh, basically Muslim population, basically, and rather academia, I should say, pretty much, right? Because most of these, at least Professor Gabriel and a couple of other guys, seems from the academia, right? And these are also Muslim converts from the West, basically white Muslim converts, and for them to have another white convert to Islam from West, basically from London, who's of Greek origin, right, to have this kind of a very what do you call, orthodox standing on a certain issue, very very sensitive issue, you can say, right? Probably they couldn't digest that, and that's why they were probably vehemently replying to him. So yeah, let's read this response from him and see, maybe we can make what other similar tweets would have, replies would have said to him. All right, can you guys see it?
Yes, we can see it. I think
All right,
this
so
is
let me read. So this is another tweet. Yesterday, I posted about my commitment to Islamic laws as understood by the pious predecessors and the four schools of thought. The majority of Muslims believe in these laws, and we affirm that they are the greatest manifestations of mercy and justice. I was not surprised as the misrepresentation from apostates and liberal academics. Most of the responses I have seen are summarized by Professor Gabriel Reynolds's opportunism and misrepresentation. Amongst other things, he framed my post on apostasy as life-threatening. The following are some points to consider. I believe they are sufficient to refute the responses I have seen so far. Right, anything to say here so far? Shall I jump on to, guys?
no. Yes, we can continue. I think. I don't think there's anything to say about this.
All right. So the first point he says is Islamic law does not condone vigilantism. The accused must go through an Islamic court of law under an Islamic government or authority. This law cannot be applied in secular societies and in secular modern nation states with majority Muslim populations. All right.
Now, yeah. So just to be very clear, I think it's irrelevant to even mention this. Actually, it's irrelevant to even mention this.
I
That
totally agree.
I mean, whether or not this is, Islam condones or supports vigilantism. You see, we are talking about an Islamic law. Okay, so we are criticizing the law itself. So whether or not it's the court that applies it, or people take that law in their hand, we are not talking about vigilantism. It's if we are talking about the law itself, which is going to be implemented by the government. We understand that, and I think this point is just to I don't know. It's just to
It's to
uh,
sugarcoat and
it's
water
yeah,
it
it's
down,
just straw
basically. It's
manning.
a
I would say
water.
it's straw man.
It's
It's
watering down
it's
the issue,
nothing.
basically. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
watering down
He's
the
just
issue.
starting with this to just start with, oh, he doesn't condone vigilantism. We don't care about vigilantism. We care about the very law itself and the government that will be implementing this law. It's
So
even more
here,
dangerous. It's even if more dangerous if the law supports, if the government supports this law. So
I
that
think
is the problem that we have with
I'll
this.
have a little bit of disagreement here on
Mm,
this with you, Khayali. I think
mm,
vigilantism is a very real threat, basically, right? And especially in those countries where the state is not ruled by Islam, basically, right? And
mhm.
Muslims may be in sizable numbers, basically. And
Mhm.
this could occur to it's it could be seen basically, right? I mean, you're saying that this is still law, state should take care of the law and all those things, but then this leaves a good opportunity for vigilantism basically, right? And that's the thing, that's the problem. I mean, anytime I think probably we're going to talk about it later on, but anybody who is known to have apostatized basically could be, executed, could be just executed by a mob. And the cases have been heard in Pakistan and other places basically. So this is a real threat, I would say. I mean, law is a problem, there's no doubt about it basically, and we are going to probably talk more about the law. But then vigilantism could be a problem as well. Somebody who thinks that I'm doing the job of I'm doing the thing in the way of Allah basically, right? So he could just take up whatever and think that I'm on a route to Jannah basically, a free pass to Jannah basically, by doing this, right?
Yeah. So he's seemingly responding to Professor Gabriel Reynolds. Do we have what Gabriel Reynolds says about this? Then we have a better understanding when he says that he framed Hamza's post as life-threatening. What does he mean by life-threatening? Does he mean life-threatening to Western Muslims? Does he mean life-threatening to himself? Does he mean life-threatening in general due to fear of I can't pronounce it properly these days.
Vigilantism.
Vigilantism, yeah.
Vigilantism, right? Yeah.
Because
So
of fear of that sort of violence coming across without the state sanctioning it. Um, is that the case, or is Reynolds saying something else? Is he talking about? So we want to figure out what Reynolds is actually saying. So is there any tweet or I don't
I
know?
don't have. Maybe I can try and search for it while you talk a little bit on it. But my
Yeah.
take reading it is that he's talking about vigilantism, probably. All right, and that's a real threat, basically. I mean, what else could be a threat, basically? Life-threatening threat, pretty much, right? In this
Hard to say.
case, basically, in particular.
That could help settle the matter between you and Kylie, because if the professor was talking about it within a state context, then Hamza is probably being irrelevant, right? He might not be completely irrelevant in the sense that it's responsible of Hamza, possibly very responsible to put that there. So sometimes you want to think about it in a debate format. I said ABC, you have to represent my argument and debunk my argument ABC. Represent it without doing a misrepresentation, a straw man, etc. But arguments in these sort of public forums comes with a lot of responsibility and politics and so on. And one of them might be also to make it a well-tailored post so that it dispels any potential misinterpretation or misunderstanding. And maybe Hamza, being a popular figure, has a responsibility to educate readers so that they know that when people like Professor Reynolds says stuff like life-threatening, because it's so amorphous and ambiguous as to what that means, it could potentially mean something like vigilantism, and therefore, what does he do? So he considers that angle. And even if he didn't mean it that way, he wants to he wants to ensure that he's responsible enough as a custodian of Islamic morality, if you want to call it, to educate his readers that, look, we don't condone you taking the law in your own hands. It has to go through a court, right? There has to be an Islamic government present. The law cannot apply in a secular society. There has to be procedures and rules that are abided by. You can't just willy-nilly kill somebody, right? So maybe he's committed to that ethical responsibility. Maybe I'm reading it charitably there, but the best, if we have some more enlightened views on Gabriel Reynolds' views, then it could help shed some light here.
Yeah, I can might be the case that Dr. Gabriel might have mentioned this, and maybe he might have mentioned that this statement of Hamza might lead to, you know, might cause life-threatening instances, or might be a threat to the lives of other people. So that, if that is the case, then fair enough, he mentioned it. But then I'd also like to mention that there are instances in Sahih and authentic Islamic literature and even in Sahih Hadith, where people have. So there, but I've given a link, and I believe Philo is opening that up. So there's an incident where a blind man killed his slave who was blaspheming against the Prophet, and he killed her. And then the next day, the Prophet asked who, and it was found out that she has been killed. Prophet asked who killed her. The Sahabi actually came up and he said that, okay, I killed her, and because she was blaspheming, he was very afraid that he might be punished for that. But the Prophet actually ratified that action, and he said there is no blood money for this, for his action.
You're not to be punished for this, basically, right?
Exactly. So there's no punishment, there's no retribution for this act that he's done. So there is definitely place for vigilantism, because
Yeah,
if you
that's
allow.
exactly the point, Kelly, I
Okay,
was
okay,
trying to make earlier, right? That
exactly.
this potential, whether it's a law or not, there is a very high risk for vigilantism for this law, basically, right?
Right. Right, exactly, and this is very right, and particularly, when such incidents are documented in Sahih Hadiths, I think that is the very reason that in some Islamic countries, s- vigilantism, taking law in hand, particularly when it comes to religious matters of blasphemy and similar matters. It's very common because these incidents can be ratified according to the very precedent of their prophet. So if a Sahabi can be of a Sahabi's action can be ratified by the prophet who carried out an execution without being authorized to do so, then what is vigilantism? If this is not vigilantism, what is it? What is vigilantism? If you are ratifying a murder after it happened, when the
Yeah,
person who murdered did
there
not have
there are
any authorization for it.
there are cases about this. I mean, so many cases in Pakistan and
Exactly.
Afghanistan. I mean, this Sri Lankan guy who was probably a year or two back, he was killed for just writing something right on the uh, outside of the wall. It was considered for blasphemy. The
Exactly.
mob just lynched him. Then what was this guy's name? 2017. What was his name?
Where are you
Uh,
talking about? In which country?
No, in Pakistan there was this young boy who just was accused of blasphemy, and what was his name? I
Which
forgot.
place? Well,
In
there are
Pakistan,
quite
in
a few
probably
incidents.
Rawalpindi or some place up
So
north.
there was Mishal
Yeah,
Khan.
Mashal Khan, right? Mashal
Mashal
Khan,
Khan was actually,
right?
yes,
Mashal
exactly.
Khan was
He was a non-believer. Yeah, I think probably he was. So
yeah,
I believe he was an atheist, and he was killed in his university by
yeah,
by the
yeah,
university
and there was a
students. And
clear
yeah,
case of vigilantism, right?
exactly,
Right.
it was
So
vigilantism. And I would say, even so, let's say in that case, maybe the mob was indeed, there were people who were arrested and all that. Fine, fair enough. Uh, there are still were, let me consider the case of Mumtaz Qadri, who killed the governor of Punjab,
Salman
Taseer.
Tasir,
So
yeah,
that guy, when he was actually executed, uh, he had one of the biggest funerals in Pakistan. So there were, I don't know how many thousands
lakhs
of
and
people.
lakhs, tens of lakhs of people,
I
I
don't know how
heard.
many, maybe, yeah. There were,
Yeah,
I don't know how many people who were there to pray for his forgiveness, in a way, for pray for his janaza,
to attend
yeah,
his
to attend his funeral,
funeral. Yeah,
because they regarded him very highly because of what he has done.
what he had done, right?
He was a vigilant, right?
Yeah,
And what he did was vigilantism. Why were so many people, including scholars, why were they supporting him? Now you would say that, okay, Hamza doesn't agree with them. Fine, you don't agree with them. We are showing you a Sahih Hadith where it has been an action of a Sahabi has been ratified, and then there are so many Muslim scholars who support such actions. Still, if you're saying that this is something your statement or this law does not result in any sort of vigilantism, I think it's very obviously that that is not the case.
yeah, I agree. And I just wanted to point out that this is a hadith that is classed as Sahih by Al Albani, basically, and it's in Sunan Abi Dawud, basically, right?
Exactly, and there's another Turk.
4361.
Yeah, another narration of the same incident
Yeah, that is also
in
classed as
Sunan
Sahih
al-Nisai.
by, it's in
Exactly,
Sunan an-Nasai basically, right? 4081 basically, right? And again, Sahih by Al-Albani basically. So
exactly.
yeah, I mean there are at least two places where it's been tagged as Sahih, and so it's a very authentic hadith basically.
Right. And further, what I'd like to talk about, what he's mentioned in the tweet is that this law cannot be implemented in secular societies, including secular societies where Muslims are in majority. On what ground does he claim that? Is he making that sort of judgment or making that statement? That in secular modern nation states with majority Muslim population, he's saying that this law cannot even be applied in such countries. Why not?
Yeah,
Why
I
wouldn't
mean
a Muslim
what
majority?
stops them to bring
What
this
stops
about
them?
basically?
Yeah, what is
Yeah,
stopping them?
yeah, exactly
To be
basically.
honest, yeah, I think he kind of naively is thinking maybe that even if it's a Muslim majority population, if the state apparatus is still secular, if the government is a lawmaker made through man-made legislation, for example, is being produced, the Quran and the Sunnah are not being used as the
Yeah,
primary sources, then and therefore you don't have full state control, whatever you want to call it. Even a Muslim
yeah,
majority population enacting this, even through a, let's say, the British House of Commons with British politicians, somehow it wouldn't be appropriate. It wouldn't be considered Islamically lawful. So the entire it has to be Sharia government, right? It can't be. I think that's what he means. I think he's trying. The reason he's saying it is to exaggerate the strength of the idea that this vigilantism can't
yeah.
happen.
He's
That's what
trying
he's
to
trying to.
calm. He's
Yeah.
trying to, reduce the the fear, trying to calm people down. Like, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about this law. This does not relate to you at all. That is what
Yeah.
he's trying to do. Don't worry
In
about this law.
practice, obviously, in practice, if you have a Muslim
It's
majority
it's
population,
it's mollifying in vain basically. It's trying to
yeah,
mollify the
yeah,
Western crowd basically, that even if you have this majority Muslim population
Exactly.
in a
Yeah.
secular state, it's not gonna happen. But then
Yeah.
it is gonna happen because those. I mean, the example that you gave of this Mumtaz Qadri, basically, right? Uh, that's a prime example. People like those will want to have these laws, and minority of ulamas probably will support for it. Basically, there's no doubt about it because
Absolutely.
that's the most orthodox position to hold. Basically, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, he's making a very technical statement because he would say, well, let's say there's a country where the Muslims, are now in a majority, and the moment or the very year that they become a majority, they change their country from secular to an Islamic country. They say that the constitution is now Islamic. So now Hamza would say, well, you see, now if the country implements this law, it's no longer a secular country. So he's saying that the moment the country starts implementing Islamic laws, it is no longer a secular country. So that's why my statement makes sense. Well, why? What importance or what is the sense of using this statement at all? Why are you even mentioning this? That in a secular
Yeah.
modern nation where Muslim are in majority, well, the Muslim majority can change the constitution
Right.
if they can.
Exactly. And
If they
anytime
can,
they,
then
yeah,
exactly. So
anytime they
yeah,
come in a majority, they would want to change the constitution to have the Islamic
exactly,
law rather than have a
exactly.
secular law, because they wouldn't want it
Particularly,
to be secularly. Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
particularly when Hamza is already sort of indicating in his original tweet that his position is what is held, and in fact, in this very tweet, that this position is held by majority of the Muslims. This is not an uncommon understanding about
Exactly.
the law of apostasy.
Right.
So
Right. I mean,
yeah, so when this is a very common belief and understanding of the Islamic scholarship, then why wouldn't this become a law the moment there is a Muslim majority in any country? There should become a law. In fact, this
it
is
will
a
become
sort
a
of
law, basically. Yeah.
this is a responsibility of the Muslims to try to implement as many Islamic laws as possible. So the moment they are a majority, they have the power to change that law. They have the power to make that country's constitution Islamic.
I
Why
mean,
wouldn't they? They are
yeah.
bound.
I
They
mean,
are
it's
sort of
it's it's it's
instructed to do so
contrary.
by exactly,
This statement is contrary to the belief that they work for,
exactly,
in their whole life that caliphate should be established. The first
Absolutely.
rule of caliphate is to have the Islamic rule and
I
law,
think
basically, right?
another motivation in his mind is that he probably disagrees. Here's the funny thing. He probably disagrees with the law being taken into one's own hands, the Mishal Khan type of. If is his name Mishal Khan? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, Mashal Khan.
Mishal Khan being killed. He probably disagrees with that. Probably looks at it and thinks that's wrong, right? So he's trying to say that look, it can only be done where we properly identified with evidence, strong evidence that somebody has professed, let's say, leaving the faith, and he has the opportunity to repent, and etc. Conditions are fulfilled. And to ensure that, you need procedure. For procedure, you need court systems, jurists, judges, and so on and so forth. So he's trying to say that when the professor argues that it's life-threatening, it can be life-threatening can be used in two ways: in a moral way or a non-moral way. And he considers the Mishal Khan type situations to be non-moral. And if that's what people are thinking is
Yes.
life-threatening, then come on. Of course, if you put it, I'm only advocating it to happen through the court system, so Mishal Khan situations can't happen. But the moral situations in which one's life is threatened, it's moral. It's like the death penalty, what that's justified in America for crimes. And in that situation, so what if it's life-threatening? It's moral, and that's why in his following points he explains that when it's properly applied within the state procedure, state apparatus with judges, evidence, the argument for its morality and its justness lays with the philosophical arguments for why it's, and he explains it like tries to explain it through the harm. We'll go to it in a minute. Tries to explain it through the harm principle, but here he's just trying to condemn the deviations from the procedure, because for that he does consider it to be immoral. What do you think about that? Maybe he's trying to say something like that.
No, I think I agree with you. That is what he's trying to say. He does not agree with vigilantism in terms of people taking the law in their own hand when it comes to implementing this law or killing an apostate. I understand that, and I totally agree that that is his view based on his tweets, and that might be his view definitely. I think I've heard this from a majority of these Muslim dais. Their view is definitely that vigilantism, according to them, is not allowed. Although there are
Yeah.
hadiths as we've just
What
shown,
I'm saying
but yes, I
you're,
agree with that. Yes.
what I'm
But I
saying is
think
you're
that's a very naive view, basically. And then the problem is there is no, as we have shown, that there is no punishment for vigilantism. So I mean, even if you think that is wrong, there's I mean, there's nothing to stop you from doing vigilantism, basically. I mean, that's the point we are trying to make here, right? Basically.
But what I'm saying is that maybe that's why he's stressing this very technical point regarding, even if there was a Muslim majority, if the state isn't functioning as an Islamic state, even then you can't do it. In order to minimize the risk of misidentification, what's it called? Crowd generated aggression against somebody who's been just accused of departing from the faith and stuff like that, right? He thinks that is the disgusting part. That maybe people like
No, but
Reynolds, yeah.
Madan, but I think if that is what he's trying to say, because we're just right now focusing on the last statement of his first point, which is this law cannot be applied in secular societies. If what I've understood from what you're saying, if he's trying to say that, then he would have said that this law would not be applied anywhere, even in an Islamic state. Law would not be allowed or applied, right? If you're referring to this vigilantism sort of. Sort of people allowing people to take the law in their own hand. I think
Mm.
he's just emphasizing, I think, the fact that this law of punishing the apostate cannot be applied in secular societies, because he's
Yeah,
mentioned
no,
secular societies.
no, that's what I mean. No, I agree with that. I never disagreed with that. I don't think. No, I don't think he would universally condemn all forms of that he would universally condemn all forms of context. What he's trying is what I'm trying to say is that when Professor he reads Professor Reynolds' work, and you see him saying that it's life threatening. I think he gets the impression when he sees the word life threatening, he thinks willy nilly people are gonna threaten immorally in his mind people's lives like Michel Khan's. And in order to ensure that that doesn't happen, he's trying to re-emphasize the idea that, look, no, willy-nilly people can't do that, because it has to happen through a state apparatus, right? And that's why he's strongly emphasizing the idea that even where there was a Muslim majority, even in that situation. So what we're trying to say is accuse him for being gullible, right? He doesn't realize that if there's a Muslim majority, obviously they're gonna change the constitution. But he's trying to say that, look, even if there is a Muslim majority, as long as the constitution hasn't been changed and the procedures are not there and it's not being followed aptly, it won't be moral. It won't be Islamically viewed as a moral act, right? So there's no real life-threatening situation here.
I think you're being a bit too charitable, maybe, because I think based on what the last statement says, I think it seems to be indicating that he's just referring to the actual law, along with along with its required procedures, the actual law that is sort of supported by the Islamic literature and sources. I think that is what he's referring to in his last statement. But yeah, I mean, that's what I think about it. Maybe he I might be wrong, but I think it seems obvious to me.
Do we have Reynolds? Do we have Philo? By the way, do you have Reynolds' work anywhere, or have you not found anything?
No, unfortunately, I don't, because I tried to search for it. I can't find it. Basically, maybe.
I think it's fine if we even don't have it. So it's fine
Yeah,
if
I think
we have considered.
can.
Yeah, we can focus
Yeah,
on his tweet, maybe, because we might be
yeah,
we might get into too much detail. Then I think
yeah.
his tweet alone, I think, is quite enough for us to talk about his point. From his first point, I think what we agree with is he's trying to say that he does not support vigilantism. Fair enough, and I think that is honestly his point. And the only thing that at least I'm concerned with is his last statement. Sorry,
Madan's
Madan, I think
feedback. Madan feedback.
yeah, with his last statement about law not being applied in secular modern societies or nations, even where majority of Muslim with majority Muslim populations. So I think that issue still remains. I mean, I still have an issue with that statement. I go along with the statement that Islam does not condone
Yeah,
vigilantism.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, there. Yeah.
So
So
let's go to
yeah,
point
that's what
let's go to
point
point
number two.
two.
Yeah,
Let's go.
let's go.
Yeah. So there is no mind control or Islamic police seeking to know the innermost beliefs of people. If someone leaves the Islam internally without professing it, the law does not apply. What do you think?
Yeah,
I
what do
think
I say?
this is a really wacky take on it. I mean, for a lack of a better word, I used the word wacky basically, and why I'll just explain basically. Now it's gonna be really really hard for someone to unless until somebody becomes a munafiq basically, it would be hard for him to uh, not be a Muslim and live in a society where everybody is Muslim and not be pointed out by those around him being seen as someone really low life creature basically. And in that sense, they would go and report to probably the local mosque or some other place where now that case might go to the court basically, right? And this might look like long-winded thing, but it's a fair possibility basically. And then that guy might still be tried for leaving Islam basically, or maybe again the case for vigilantism comes into play again basically, right? So this is too naive that somebody leaves I mean the societal structure is such that basically it's not going to happen that you leave Islam and be quiet and nobody's going to care.
I mean,
And
yeah.
it's going to be really really hard basically.
Let me just add some to your point. So he says there is no mind control or Islamic police, but technically there is, right?
Exactly.
There is an Islamic police. I mean, of course there is. I mean, there's an enforcement regime. There's courts. That is the Islamic police, right? So there's the public has a duty to educate, inform, keep an eye on, spread dawah, pressure, even condemn. Not eternally condemn. They don't have God's role, but to even give strong, maybe with some punishments as well, to people, children, for example, teenagers, your child, to pray, to follow the edicts of Islam to etc., etc., etc. So of course there is an Islamic police. I mean, as there's constant supervision, unless you're living in a forest somewhere. Yeah. The other thing is, so is there some mind control? Yeah. Secondly, it's entirely about mind control, right? Because I just don't get this part. The threat of forever death lurks upon your mind if you change your mind. That what is otherwise, this is the best form of mind control, right? Right. What is brainwashing is when you condition somebody in a particular way and you punish them to ensure that they have those habits and beliefs, and every time they drop that belief you punish them. It's like aversion therapy. It's like the Miller experiment. Is it the Miller, or something like that, or Stanley Miller? I think I'm thinking about one of the academics in psychology. I forgot. I think it's Miller. Like conditioning, classical conditioning, but it's a essential way of brainwashing people, and that's what cults do as well. That if you don't do X, Y, Z, we will take this away and move this away. Is there something like that in Islam? Of course there is. He's trying to make it out like that. Islamic belief is Islamic laws are very liberal, very very non-invasive. Very, it's not. It's a very authoritarian, controlling. And most Orthodox Muslims proudly oppose that value, that it's not a liberal religion. It's a very invasive religion. So there is Islamic police, and mind control does aptly apply here, because there's threats of hell, threats of punishment. So what else is a better definition for mind control? And so people are trying to figure out people's innermost beliefs in some sense, right? And then let me just say a few more things. Then there's this other element where, and now this point I'm a little bit more uncertain about, so you guys can help me here. But I know, for example, if somebody stops, let's say, reading namaz, knowingly that he's supposed to read namaz, and then somewhat suggests that he thinks that namaz is not necessary, and purports this, that by definition removes him from the faith, right?
Yes.
He's out
Yes.
non-Muslim.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yes,
in
it
this
does.
case, does he need to openly profess that he's left Islam, or would this itself, this behavior or conduct itself, be enough to suggest he's an ex-Muslim? In which case, now I'm not sure actually about this. I'm not sure whether it would apply. Is the apostasy law tightly constrained to profession, self-profession? I don't think so. I think people who can strongly know the other person has left, I suspect anyway, is
I think
enough.
jury is out on this basically, but
Ooh.
yeah, I mean there are different you know take on this basically, different takes on it basically. Somebody would say once you stop reading namaz, then you are already out of the fold of Islam, pretty much. But others would say no, you're not. But I mean, maybe Kelly would clarify it pretty much. Yeah, but technically, if you think through it, then if you stop reading namaz, then you are already out of the fold of Islam. If you consider the pillars of
Yes.
Islam, pretty much, right?
Yeah,
So
so actually, yeah, the source of this is a hadith which mentions that Prophet said that a person who deliberately leaves a prayer, he is a kafir, or he has done kufr. So
exactly.
now the scholars of Islam were a bit concerned that if that is what the standard is to, or that is a criteria of becoming a kafir, then I believe that then according to them, a lot of Muslims might end up not being a Muslim because they are doing kufr or clear kufr, because not a lot of them are not praying and they're leaving prayer deliberately. So they came up, probably it seems to me at least, they came up with a solution. They said, okay, now it's not like the fact that he's deliberately left just because he's feeling a bit lazy. They say that until and unless he actually believes that the prayer is not required in Islam, or it is not an essential part of Islam, it is not farz or something like that. So he's a heretical belief. So instead of making this something to do with the deeds, which seems to be the intention of the hadith, may at least when a person reads it, the scholars have made it related to a belief of a person, of a Muslim, that if that person believes that that prayer is not mandatory in Islam, and in such a Muslim leaves prayer, then such a Muslim becomes a kafir. So yes, and I agree that what Mahadin's concern is, that it's not just about professing that you have become a non-Muslim. There are many scholars, particularly I'm aware of many scholars in subcontinent, who have declared other sects non-Muslims, and they have even declared them, worthy of being killed because they are now apostates. So, so for example, one of the very big sects in the subcontinent is the Barelvi firqa, the Barelvi sect. And the leader of, or the founder of that sect, Ahmad Reza Khan Barelvi, he actually declared all the other sects, even the Sunni sects of the Ubandis and Ahl Hadith as well. He declared them non-Muslims, and he said that yes, he declared them non-Muslims to the level that he said that the animals that they slaughter are not halal for Muslims, for Barelvis. So this is the kind of level, and I think he might have mentioned that, since so this clearly means that they are no longer Muslims, and once you declare someone non-Muslim, now that person can be considered a non-Muslim, and therefore can be killed,
Apostate,
according to this.
basically.
Yeah, will be considered an apostate. Exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
I'll give you an example. For example, at the time of Abu Bakr,
And this,
the first caliph, there were people who, according to the history, Islamic history, there were people who said that they will not give zakat, and actually the first caliph Abu Bakr actually waged war against these people, and it is understood by the scholars that actually they were, the moment that they stopped paying zakat, actually they were sort of mm, uh, they were leaving Islam, and therefore the first prophet, the first caliph, seemed it fair that he can actually kill them, because you know they have now stopped believing probably in one of the pillars of Islam.
right, those were the Battle of Yamama, basically, or
Exactly,
the Ridda Wars,
exactly,
basically, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Let me just
So the
amplify.
yes,
Let me just amplify
Mhm.
something there. It doesn't necessarily mean when you are concealing the truth. It means when you genuinely actually think one of the fundamental pillars or prerequisites of Islam is false, even in that scenario. So it's not as though you know namaz is a requirement and then you purport that it's not. In which case you're concealing the truth. In which case you've left the fold of
no,
Islam.
no,
It's
yeah,
not
that's
really
not
that.
the case. No, it's
Yeah.
not really that. It's just having the wrong belief,
Belief. Yeah.
which you think it's true. So a person who
Mm.
truly believes that Islam, or that a prayer, that praying is not a part of Islam or not mandatory, he becomes a
Yeah.
non-Muslim. So yeah, he truly
So
believes it.
even Madin, some would consider the Quran as apostates, pretty much.
Exactly.
Basically,
Yes.
if
Mm.
you don't, if you take down the number of namaz from 5 to 3,
Yes.
then
Yes.
still you are an apostate under the eyes of some, basically, and a large
Yes.
majority, I'm saying, right? Because Quranists are a very small minority, uh, you know, and they believe there are only 3 prayers mentioned in the Quran, basically,
Yeah.
and
Let,
they
Yes.
let me, let me just
even then.
emphasize a little, let me just emphasize a little bit of a safeguarding thing, though. I think it usually means when you're of sound mind, not insane. You don't have like some crazy cognitive disability. I think,
Yes.
as far as I know. And furthermore, where you have been at least you have the resources and the exposition to the ideas. I don't think, I don't think genuine misapprehension that due to
Yes.
lack of can really apply. That can easily be corrected. I think it's more to do with the strident disregard or something. I think that's where the confusion lies. I think some people therefore try to say that it's only when they're being highly when they're hiding it, right? Because if you're genuinely exposed to something and you know it's likely to be the truth, then if you go against it, it probably the people interpret it like people. It means when you are concealing it in your heart, when you know it's the truth that you have to pray, but you say you don't have to pray. But then other people would say that actually it doesn't mean that. What it means is that just there to ensure that you have been given the resources, you've been shown the light, but you still didn't come towards it, and you still hold a position that's different from the prerequisites. and therefore you are out of the fold, right?
Right. And I
Right.
think I'd also point out that this is a very, I would say, ridiculous way of maybe even replying to a criticism that might have been raised. I don't think anyone would be claiming that Islam claims to have any sort of innermost a visibility of innermost beliefs of any person. I think that is who's claiming that. Is that something that Professor Reynolds said? I think what he might have said is that that just because a person says, or maybe or if a person believes, he should not be punished for his beliefs. So if that is his statement, I think it's quite obvious that he's not saying that that Islamic law actually goes into the mind. So the point is, without professing it, if he's just trying to say that, oh well, the problem is in professing the fact that you are no longer a Muslim. Well, he is actually the if someone criticized Hamza's view, I think it should be quite obvious that he's actually saying that a person who professes should not be punished. It's not just nobody believes that anyone has no knowledge of any person's innermost beliefs. I don't think that would be any sort of criticism that any sane person would be making. So I'm not sure why would he even respond to that criticism in that way.
Yeah, that's just his continuation of his limiting thing. What he's doing, he's trying to,
Yeah.
water everything down to limit the impact of what he said. He's trying to say, "Oh,
Correct.
look, we're not running around just trying to find apostates to kill them. It has to go through a
Exactly.
court in the first place, but there's no even Islamic police, and nobody cares. Nobody cares about
Yeah.
your internal thoughts.
Nobody
As long
cares.
as you say it with your mouth, it's like the argument for cutting
Just
off your
lie
arm.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
lie.
yeah. Like lie about it. It's like the argument for cutting off arms for theft. They say, well, yeah, we do have that, but it never will apply because nobody would steal, and therefore it's just redundant, right? It's trying to
Yeah.
wash it away, and I think this is what they're doing is like wash it away. Like it's such a high standard, has to go through a court, there has to be an Islamic system, and furthermore, there's no police, and you can't even interpret whether what you believe is right or through your body language. You can't tell whether you're apostate. You have to say it with your mouth. And as long as you don't say it with your mouth, nobody's going to know. Well, there you go.
I think that's what the difficulty here is. I mean, Hamza could have clarified things a little bit more over here. What do you mean by publicly or professing, basically, right? Outwardly, basically. Do you have to really openly admit to it? Aren't your actions gonna be an indication enough for others to understand that you have left the fold of Islam? Basically, is that a profession? Is that a sublime, or what do you call implicit professing of your disbelief in Islam? Would that be considered as at least a publicly professing or not? Basically, because people around you are gonna notice that pretty much, right? So I think that's a lot of there's a lot of lack of clarity here on part of Hamza, basically. I think, right? Because it's not a very simple issue, right? It's you're talking about life and death here, pretty much, right? A law that could put put an end to your life potentially, pretty much, right? Even just by being noticed by others, pretty much, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if the standard is so high that he has to, so again, we don't, like you said, we don't know what profess even means here. Does he have to explicitly denounce his Islamic belief explicitly? So something like, I am no longer a Muslim. I don't subscribe to these tenets. I don't believe in Muhammad was the last messenger of God. I don't believe God is the only God, or whatever like that. Does he have to explicitly mention something as close to that? Or because if that is the standard, then somebody can just go around disseminating anti-Islamic propaganda, facilitating anti-Islamic thoughts, engaging in pornography, drinking, distributing alcohol, all of these things. And as long as he just says, "No, I've not denounced Islam," then he would still be in the fold, and you can't kill him. And this is important why I'm raising this, because later on, when
Yes.
Hamza expresses the harm principle argument for defending this, if the standard is so high, then he's just made the punishment redundant, because what harm is it going to erase? Because people can just still walk around, if that's the standard, walk around and do everything that suggests that they're ex-Muslims, everything that suggests that they're against the faith, and work against the faith. And it'll be much harder to punish them for apostasy. Maybe you could say that there'll be other punishments involved, like distributing alcohol itself is illegal. I mean, in most contexts, pornography itself is illegal, and that will deal with that. But people who get around that, maybe, what it does at the very minimum is makes the apostasy punishment redundant, right? So I'm not sure that you need to actually make a profession, right? Am I right? I don't think you need a profession.
Exactly.
That's not even the
No,
law.
I think you're right. I think it's a very
Exactly.
big loophole if that is the case, because you can do everything that a person who has left Islam would or could do, and if he just claims that he is not left Islam, then he would not be punished by this law. In which case, this law would be redundant or
Right, and
pointless.
what Hamza is trying to, as you guys already said, he's trying to water it down and making it seem as if unless until he professes it by himself implicitly, basically, or
Yeah.
rather explicitly, unless and until he or she does that, they won't be punished. Basically, that's the kind of implicit statement he's putting forth here, basically, right? There's a kind of indication he's giving basically through this, but that's not the case. Basically, I mean, we all know basically how easy it is for someone to just get stranded into this thing of being called a munafiq or a kafir, pretty much, right? So
All right.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think
any other
I
conclusion?
think his what I'm thinking rather here and probably Madan would understand. He's looking at from the lens of an English society, basically, right? He doesn't know how the societies of Pakistan or Afghanistan or certain other very large Muslim population or majority countries work, basically, right?
He knows them very well. He knows it very well. He is just trying to hide it. That's all.
Yeah, probably that, right? Yeah. All right. Anything more to add? Shall we move on to point number 3 then?
Yeah, before we move on, I mean, I think like Kylie has been saying, he is misrepresenting possibly. I mean, here's the caveat: we've not read Reynolds' arguments, Professor Reynolds, so we might not actually 100% know if he is misrepresenting it without listening to Reynolds and understanding what Reynolds probably meant. So that's just a little caveat there, just in case some a Hamza supporter surprises us with a strong argument against us. So I don't want to be humiliated in public like that. So some people like many Islamic apologists that I don't like, they don't have that principle to guard against self-humiliation, but I do. So I want to put that caveat in there, so that I don't that we've not seen Reynolds' work, but I suspect, it's a suspicion, that he's being misrepresented because but just by what Philo has just said here, because if the fear is, if Reynolds is saying that it's life-threatening, in more than the context of just people taking it in their own hands, but more so also in that context that in an Islamic state this can happen. There are many countries that do purport to think that they have an Islamic state. Now, there's fundamental disagreement about as to whether that is true or the case, but if the danger is that in those countries it is life-threatening, right? It is life-threatening because there is such a state, maybe like in Saudi Arabia, where it can be applied. I still think it's on the books, right? I mean, you guys can correct me, but it seems to be the case that the apostasy penalties do apply, and if that's the case, then you can be killed for it. So it
Yeah,
is life.
Madan, there are 7 states
Hmm.
altogether where
Yeah.
this punishment is applied by death penalty, right? So Pakistan, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, I think maybe Egypt, Sudan, Somalia, or something like that. I mean, total 7 countries. So yeah, that's a very very brute fact. Basically, nobody can deny that. Basically, Okay, sorry, not maybe I'm confused between blasphemy and apostasy. So pardon me for that. But yeah,
Mm.
please go on.
Yeah. So the number of states that have apostasy penalties, I can't remember what it was, but whatever the case, I mean, again, without unpacking Reynolds what he means, but if that's what he's meaning, I think he's being misrepresented here because he's not just reducing it to a Western country where there aren't any such laws and there's no real potential for there anytime soon anyway to be such laws. But there is a real potential, if not real reality, behind apostasy laws in some other Eastern Eastern countries, Middle Eastern countries, and so on, and some South Asian maybe countries as well, or at least the potential to arise. And in that sense, it being life threatening is a real, yeah, it's a reality, right? It might not be that much of a reality in the West, but it's a reality in the East, even through a legitimate state structure. I'm not talking about vigilantism. Even through a legitimate state structure that adheres at least. Now, these are the things. I mean, is Hamza so pedantic that he thinks that it's, oh, as long as not a perfect Sharia state, he's not living in reality that there's no such thing as a perfect state at all. There's no such thing. There's not a perfect democracy or perfect communism. There'll never be such a perfect Islamic state. It will always be a close approximation or closest approximation. And in reality, in those states, that's going to be implemented. You can always play the lip service to the idea, well, this wasn't properly done or this wasn't. But in reality, is that he does give ammunition to his audience members who can then go and implement in these norms, apostasy laws, etc. I mean, that's what I suspect the professor was afraid of, that this is going to propel these sort of attitudes, and he's misrepresenting it, I think. Yeah.
Right, right. All right. Moving on to point number 3 over here. Right. Muslims living in Western or Muslim country are forbidden to take the law into their own hands. Basically, that's what his point
This
is.
is
Maybe I think
repeated.
we've already,
This
yeah,
is repeated. Have we already
yeah,
dealt
this,
with it?
yeah, we already talked about this basically, right? So, and yeah, I think we have already mentioned it is, no matter how much you say about it, but then there'll be cases where the vigilantism is gonna happen basically, and we've already explained it in detail, right? So point number 4 is Professor Reynolds' framing is self-defeating. If he perceives the laws of a society that he does not live in to be threatening, then he should feel constantly threatened by secular society. The laws in modern secular states outnumber the laws in pre-modern nations, many of which he may disagree with. Violations of such laws and resisting them can result in him being shot by an officer of the law, especially in the US. It is unfortunate that he implicitly framed my post in the worst possible manner. Right now, this is a huge
Now,
point. I think. Yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead.
You
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
before
sorry.
you guys continue, do you think that the Reynolds were actually talking? I don't understand why Hamza would write this unless Reynolds was expressing the danger of vigilantism.
Yes, he might be, and that's why I was about to say that maybe this particular point, I would not comment on this without actually seeing what Professor Reynolds said, because I have no idea what he's responding to. I cannot actually. It's not obvious to me what he's responding to over here. Maybe he's making a fair point. Maybe he's. Because I have no idea what he's responding to in this point number 4. So
I think
yeah,
okay. I mean, I'll say a little bit and see if maybe I'm wrong about it. So I'll raise my hand basically. But what do you mean by this other society, basically, right? The society that is, where you are living. That's the secular society.
yes.
And the point that I'm contesting over here is this point. Basically, he says the laws in modern secular states outnumber laws in pre-modern nations, basically. And the thing is, and the point I'm trying to make here is that laws evolve because of trying to make the societies better, and they have throughout the history, basically, right? We have seen such laws, and it is not that, I mean, you might be living in the same society that some of the laws of that society you might be fearing pretty much, right? Not that laws of other societies that you might be fearing pretty much. And you might even, there are ways to contest those. Not that, I think, maybe say for witchcraft, if somebody is saying that they don't like witchcraft, they fear witchcraft, punishment for witchcraft, they can contest against those societies and work to pass the laws that get rid of those kind of laws, basically. And this is the beauty of modern societies that work on these laws being thought over and being proposed by the assemblies, rather than just etched in stone pretty much, as from the first century AD or 7th century AD pretty much, right? So this is one point that I wanted to contest over here pretty much, right? And I agree. I don't know what exactly was said by
Yeah, so,
Professor
so
Reynolds.
when you read this, you get the impression that the reason he's saying that the framing is self-defeating is that if he perceives that, he says, if he perceives the laws of a society that he does not live in to be threatening, then he should feel threatened by a secular society. In the sense that if it is life-threatening to be in a society that is not even here yet, a Sharia law that he's not even living in, and moreover, it's not going to be applicable to him anytime soon or whatever, and he's scared of that law, then he should be scared of the laws of secular society. And it's not. Then when you read the rest, he says the violations of such laws and resisting them can result in him being shot by an officer. Now, clearly, resisting the law and being shot by an officer, he's trying to say that. Is he trying to say here that this is a miscarriage of the law? In other words, is he thinking that the Professor Reynolds is making an argument that Professor Reynolds is scared and threatened by the apostasy law because it can lead to miscarriages or vigilantism, that people can take it out of their own hands? And if he's scared of those laws, which can't happen because it's not realistic for it to happen, because it has to happen in certain Sharia sort of codified situations, and people won't take it into their own hands. If he's genuinely scared of that, though, of happening, then he should also be scared of the miscarriages of justice in the USA, like the police officer shooting. I'm not sure that's one interpretation. I'm not sure that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's not really clear whether Reynolds is talking about the vigilantism or in particular this law itself, basically. I'm thinking here he's talking about this law in itself pretty much, right? Maybe I'm wrong, though. And then he's thinking that this law, because he's talking about this law of a different land. So that's what I'm taking, that he might be referring to countries like Saudi Arabia or some places where this law is practiced even by the ruling government pretty much, right?
Yeah, let's take that interpretation that he's talking about it to be not vigilantism, but he's talking about it to be the Sharia application of this law. So is Hamza now saying that he's perceiving for a society that doesn't live in to be threatening it's self-defeating, right? Because even in then he should be scared about American laws, he should be scared about Jamaican laws, he should be scared about British laws, because violations of such laws can result in being shot by an officer, let's say, or going to prison or something like that. But even taking that, it doesn't make sense. Why is it self-defeating? First of all, maybe Reynolds is. Let's say Reynolds. Maybe Reynolds. Did he explain that he's not scared of those laws? That he might think there are more than one unjust law. One of the apostasy law is one unjust law. He might think certain laws in America, in Jamaica, in Britain are bad, and he's scared of those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying some of the same laws within the country he's living he might perceive them to be fearful, and he might say, okay, no, these are probably bad laws, basically, right? I mean, same
further,
situation. Yeah,
he says he's threatening. Is he talking about his own threatening to himself, or just threatening to people? And I'm not sure about that either. So is Reynolds saying that why would he be threatened? Because isn't he a convert? Like he's not an ex-Muslim, as far as I know.
he's a convert, basically. Yeah.
So I'm not sure he's talking about himself being threatened. He's probably saying that the laws are very threatening to those who depart from the faith or potentially depart from the faith or get accused of departing from the faith. But
maybe Reynolds has somewhere in his heart a part of him saying that maybe I'm not a Muslim anymore. Maybe he has apostatized himself, basically. You see, or maybe he fears that he might at some point leave, right? Maybe that's the fear, basically. That's the threat he's pursuing, basically. And maybe that's the threat he's perceiving for himself, but talking about as a general public. I don't know. Maybe we are reading way too much into his, post. At least this point, basically.
Yeah, this particular point sounds very strange to me, to be honest. And
maybe it won't be clear until we read the original post by Professor Reynolds.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So let's move on to point. Kyle, you want to add something?
No. I agree that this point needs some clarification based on what Professor Renard actually said.
All right, then let's move on to point number 5, basically, right? Islamic laws have their nuances, preconditions, and exemptions, which classical scholars were aware of. It refuses to be reduced to a caricature of violence, regardless of professors' attempts, basically. All right, so here in point number 5, basically.
I don't think we do we have to cover this point separately? Because I think the last point is the most interesting one, the last 2 points. So let's skip this one. I don't think it says anything interesting, unless you
All
guys
right,
have some
I'm just
point
gonna
to say about this.
call him out on his English, basically, right? His English grammar, basically, a very petty point, basically. So he's talking about Islamic laws, right? As in plurality, and after that, he uses it. Basically, he has to be better at grammar, basically, right? Just a very petty point. Just because we had to take something out of this point, basically talk about that. So anyways, point number 6, let's move on to point number 6. Citing this law as unfair or unequal because Islamic law allows Christians to leave their religion to embrace Islam, yet forbids Muslims to leave Islam, falsely assumes a secular or liberal presupposition that all religions are equal or that it is an individual choice. Firstly, there is no violation of equality principle. Similar things must be treated similarly. Dissimilar things must be treated dissimilarly. Leaving Islam, in brackets, the truth, for another bracket, another religion, bracket closed. Falsehood is not the same as leaving Christianity. Falsehood for Islam, the truth. The liberal will assume that the two religions are the same. This is a false assumption which we can prove. Therefore, the debate shifts from the apostasy law to the veracity of Islam. I welcome that debate. Secondly, the atomistic or individualistic approach is false. Muslims are under no obligation to adopt such an approach. In fact, theories on social influence and conformity reject such an approach. In a nutshell, human beings are not merely individuals. The choices they make impact society. All right, this is a big point, basically.
Right. Well, Kylie, you were quiet for a bit. Do you want to go first? Because I've got a lot to say about this. This is popping up into my area, which is, social philosophy and concepts regarding free speech and so on and so on. So, but go on.
Yeah. No, I think I'll let you speak first, because what I want to talk about is the very last part of his point, which actually connects directly with the 7th point. And I have a lot to say about that 7th point, actually.
All
So
right.
yeah, go ahead and talk about what you want to say.
So the first thing that I'm noticing with this is that, citing this law as unfair or unequal because Islamic law allows Christians to leave their religion to embrace Islam, yet forbids Muslims to leave Islam, falsely assumes a secular or liberal presupposition that all religions are equal, or that it is an individual choice. Now, if he's talking from Muslim to Muslim, which Professor Reynolds supposedly is, then that's not necessarily a wrong point, in the sense that it depends on Reynolds' stance on this, but why would Reynolds be presupposing a secular point of view or paradigm, right? A liberal presupposition, because if you're a Muslim, arguably the idea that the Christians were told to leave, to leaving their religion, to leave Islam, that being a proudly welcomed and accepted part of Islam, is that's correct. That is going to be treated differently. There's going to be a different standard for that, without it being a double standard, because within the paradigm of Islam, those actions are treated differently. The action arrived at Islam and leaving religion, such as Christianity, is a good thing. It's moral. The departure from Islam is a bad thing. It's immoral. And the fairness principle, the equality or secular principle of treating them both as equal with equal weight doesn't enter the sphere of Islamic thinking, apart from the very fringes of maybe modern day progressive Islam. So I would say this is an internal debate that, at least amongst orthodox classical scholars, would win in favor of the Hamza's view. And is this particular professor more of a progressive scholar? And there will still be an internal debate amongst Muslims whether, to the extent this sort of liberal principle can be reconciled with Islam versus this non-liberal principle where Christianity, departing from Christianity is welcomed, but departing from Islam isn't welcomed. Right? I think that it's hard to comment on that exactly, and I actually probably side with Hamza to say that seems to be the scholarly consensus, that the two are different. So it's correct. There's little violation of the equality principle, because they don't view it as the same. And he tries to kind of incorporate some degree of the equality principle by saying that similar things must be treated similarly when different things to be treated dissimilarly. That's a very broad application of the equality principle, and that's correct in an abstract sense. But the problem is this might be an equivocation, because the equality principles under state law is very different, because it has some assumptions embedded within it already, in that all religions are to be tolerated equally. The equality principle emerges from the principle of, let's say, the freedom of expression, and a subset of that is the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And a subset of freedom of religion is the right and the autonomy to leave your religion and embrace different beliefs and interact with different beliefs, and so on. And that principle pretty much is predicated on the idea that of many ideas of, like, you need democratic speech, you need a free marketplaces of ideas. All beliefs are tentative, provisional, circumstantial. It can change with new evidence, and therefore we must tolerate differences. We don't know who's entirely absolutely right, because there's no absolute truth. So that belief, this particular version of the equality principle, when it comes to equally treating many different beliefs, which emerges from the freedom of expression principle, are built on certain assumptions about secular reality, right? And under that paradigm, this is not the same version of the equality principle that Hamza is talking about, which is equal things must be treated. No. How do we know?
I think it's an Islamic equality principle, basically, right? From his paradigm, basically. So, yeah.
It's a coherent one. It's sensible, and people that do use it, things that are like each other should be treated similarly. Things that are different, But this is not what maybe the professor's talking about. It's not what other people mean when they say the equality principle, because the equality principle is philosophically justified under different premises, and he doesn't engage with it. But we understand what Hamza would say. He says he will reject that anyway entirely. So he's trying to be political here as well. I think he's trying to say we reject that one, but we have this one, and it makes more sense this way, because we think because the assumptions of secularism are wrong. There is a true religion, there is a right and wrong, there is absolute truth, and therefore true belief should be tolerated, such as Islam. Deviating from true belief requires the mandatory punishment. Deviating from wrong beliefs and coming to true beliefs should be welcomed, and there's no punishment for that. And therefore, there's no violation of the equality principle in that sense. Okay. I don't even disagree with him there in that point. Apart from, obviously, I disagree with him fundamentally, but I mean, I don't disagree with this. I understand this is self-consistent, right? So then he goes on to say, leaving Islam, the truth for another religion. We've already discussed that part. The liberal will assume that the two are the same. That's true. This is a false assumption under which you have to prove. That's true as well. You do have to go ahead and prove it. Therefore, the debate shifts from the apostasy law to the veracity of Islam. And that's possibly correct as well. Yes, he's right in the sense that in order to demonstrate that secularism, the secular liberal paradigm, is false, he has to prove the Islamic paradigm, right? Which is an uphill battle, because that's the danger. He's probably saying this proudly, but he doesn't realize that the weakness of that is probably one of the most difficult things to do. Not only have to prove the existence of God, not only have to prove the existence of Islam being true, but you have to prove that the God is also a moral being, that all his edicts are likely to be true, and that encounters stuff like the problem of evil. It encounters self-defeating.
That the Quran is from this God and all those things. Basically, heaps of claims that you will have to just prove alongside, basically, right?
And the whole point of secularism arising during the Enlightenment era was precisely because that was too difficult to prove and demonstrate. Nobody could do it. So secularism was picked as like the best place to be. I mean, I would echo Barack Obama here when he tried to defend very amongst a non-philosophical, non-sophisticated audience, tried to defend the reasons for secularism, and he said something to the effect of, we would like, we know, for example, Abraham said, Abraham got a dictate from God to kill his son. He got a dictate from God to kill his son. We know that. However, only Abraham kind of knew this. We know this we know this now from the stories and so on, from the books. But if Abraham was here walking around saying that he's got a dictate from God, nobody will be able to see it because there's not publicly accessible evidence. There's no empirical evidence to support it. People will think he's a madman. Now, even though it might be true, it's not true to your neighbor. It's not true to the person down the road. It's not true to etc. We can't verify that Abraham really got that. So the demand for secularism is to build a society based on things that we can mutually, consensually build about the world, right? Things that we all recognize to be obvious empirical facts about the world. And unfortunately, Abraham's tale doesn't fit the mix. Henceforth, we ought to build a society based on rational principles, secular principles, etc., logic, empirical facts, and develop laws based on that. But if there are people like Abraham along, we tolerate his beliefs and so on, and allow them to be expressed. But he can't impose it on somebody else because it's not publicly accessible, right? Now that's one argument for secularism. I mean, Hamza may take an attack on that and say that empiricism not only the way. But think about it this way. I mean, yeah, true. A more sophisticated.
I mean, it's more practical than it's more practical in a sense, secularism rather than. I agree.
Yeah, I won't go into the deeper arguments, but that's the one kind of way to do it. But then he goes on to say, therefore, the debate shifts from the apostasy law to veracity of Islam. Yes, I welcome the debate. Secondly, the atomistic and individualistic approach is false. Right now, he just asserts this. He doesn't give any justification, but we get the impression that obviously he's got some reasons for that, right? Muslims are under no obligation to adopt such an approach. That's true, especially if you've got different arguments for it. In fact, theories on social influence and conformity reject such an approach. Well, right, and that's the thing. Theories of social influence and conformity reject such an approach, but theories of individualism and atomism, let's say, reject the theories of social influence and social conformity. So what? The fact that people are rejecting these things, yeah, I agree, they reject it because he doesn't give any evidence or substantiation or explanation, which is probably not the point of the post. He's trying to just convince his Islamic crowd that we don't need to accept these things. But the point is, just like he doesn't need to accept, what I'm trying to say is, just like he doesn't need to accept those things, we don't need to accept these things, right? So then he says, in a nutshell, human beings are not merely individuals, right? That's true. And I could also say human beings, societies are not merely collectives. It consists of individuals, right? So the parallel applies there as well. So what? In fact, most individualistic paradigms are not, you don't have to be this kind of atomistic individualist person. Most societies, most secular societies today, in practice, do both. It's a blend of liberal laws and laws that take into account the greater good. What was this coronavirus stuff that we just faced recently? What about military laws? What about insurance? What about safety seatbelt laws? There is no law that to date that I know of. There's no society. There's no secular liberal society to this day that I know of that allows unfettered, unregulated individualism, right? And I don't just mean the law will intervene when you affect somebody else. I'm trying to say that sometimes the law will intervene more than just that, even if you affect yourself. In some circumstances, sometimes if you're like trying to kill yourself, the law will intervene and will take you from society, put you in a mental health hospital, right? And if you have an aggregation of individuals acting in a particular way that leads to, on aggregate, harm to societies to such an extent that the law ought to intervene because the societal harm outweighs the individual freedom, because the benefit that they get from the individual freedom is so outweighed by the significant societal harm, then laws can be created to curb that. In fact, my area, human rights law, deals with that. It's called proportionality. Proportionality is a stage of human rights law in which it deals with that. If you have a human right to your individuality, your individual human autonomy, your privacy, whatever. But if the societal harms become so outweighing, then laws can be created by countries to curb it legitimately. So nobody's making this argument from a secular perspective that I know of, apart from anarchists maybe and ultra-liberalists, ultra-libertarians. But the average secular person is not an ultra-libertarian. And most secular societies are not ultra-libertarian. And they have this kind of blend between individual rights and collective rights. Right? Okay.
Right.
That's all I
Yeah.
want to say. And because that's all I want to say. And I don't think even if the professor is a type of progressive Muslim who incorporates some of these liberal ideals, even he's not an anarchist. He doesn't think everybody's just an atom or an individual. He probably believes there are some limits to that. Anyway, go on. Yeah.
Only thing I wanted to mention over here, the last point that he mentions, seems like a non-point pretty much, in a sense, basically, or some sort of a straw man, basically, because nobody thinks that a secular society is merely individualistic society, pretty much. It is very well based on, as you already mentioned, Mahadan, so I'm just probably repeating what you already said. It's very, very well maintained on a societal structure, pretty much. Maybe you can say that the individuals have a lot more probably leeway in a sense, right? But so it seems like I'm not quite sure why he's attacking that thing and making it seem as if societies, secular societies are only individualistic, pretty much, which is not the case, very much. All right, Kelly, you want to add something, or shall we then?
So my point actually, what I want to say about it relates a lot more to the seventh point, and I think so. It's better that we move on, because the last statement in the sixth point, which mentions that society does not, human beings are not mere individuals; their choices make impact on society. I think this, in a way, would relate to this point number 7 as well, and my point relates to that. So let's go through the seventh point first, and then we can then I'll talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So he
All right,
goes.
let's go through. Yeah.
He goes to say
You want
then.
to?
Yeah, I'll just read it out. Or do you want to read it out?
Oh, go ahead, Mahadan.
All right.
Go ahead.
So he says, finally, the notion of the harm principle can be applied to the apostasy law. Now, why does he want to do this? Why does he need the harm principle? Doesn't it? So here's. Let me just add. Shall I finish reading it?
Yeah, I think we talked about this, and I said maybe he's in his mind he's just thinking harm principle, but does he need to bring harm principle in between a DCT, basically? Even if
Exactly.
it's a DCT, divine command theory, would you take harm principle into account, basically? That's my question. I would simply question him basically on that.
It depends on what type of DCT he believes in. So if he believes in the what's his name?
The modified?
No. The Islamic philosopher who is Al
Ghazali.
Ghazali. Ghazali
The
view.
Ghazali.
Ghazali.
Yeah.
Ah, the
Yeah.
Ghazali one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if he believes in the Ghazali view of it, which is that it's just arbitrary, then absolutely not. Yeah, you don't need harm principle because you just say
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. But I think I'm not sure if he does believe in the Ghazali version of it because he thinks when he argues it, because he's got his education primarily, I think, from the Western canon philosophy education. He kind of goes toward the William Lane Craig modified divine command theory, where God is benevolent, and that's why his commands are good, right? And therefore, it's not entirely arbitrary in that sense, right? Um, because of his benevolence makes God's commands to be consistent with benevolence, right? It's not just his whims. And if that's the case, then a benevolent God would clearly have reasons why that are consistent with mercy, compassion, and etc. Why he has got an apostasy law, and maybe that does align with a harm principle type of take. So I think that he might be operating under that because I've seen him say that so many times. God, the reason God is good is because God is benevolent, and the reason why God won't command rape is not because he could have just made rape right. He could never make rape right simply because rape is always wrong under because a benevolent being won't do it, and God is benevolent, and therefore when God never command rape. Rape is probably a bad example in the context of Islam, but let's go with it. Yeah, when God will never command you to do rape is because it's not the benevolent thing to do, and God will only command to do things because it's benevolent. Because it conforms to the standard, consistent with the standards of
Madan,
God.
Madan, I
Yeah.
don't want to get into a digression, but I find it
Mm.
really ludicrous that a God won't command rape but would allow it, basically, and
Yeah.
still would call himself benevolent, basically. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
just a small point, but move on.
Yeah. So, in other words, he's therefore feels obligated, I think, Hamza, to explain it through that lens, and he therefore gives a harm principle type of argument. So maybe that's why he's utilizing the harm principle. I think that's a reasonable interpretation because I think he would even if he's listening to me, he'd probably agree with that. Because I don't think he subscribes to the arbitrary school of Ghazali's arbitrariness, where he bites the bullet that God is just a whimsical being and he just makes things up. He could have just made mellow, he could have been anything. He could have just said anything, etc. Um, yeah. So then he goes on to say, limited to prevent harm to other individuals. Apostasy in Islam is considered a great harm to society and to the individual who leaves Islam. For instance, hell is a great harm to the individual, the final abode of apostates. Allowing people to leave Islam without a mechanism to prevent them can lead to social fragmentation of the Muslim social group, which inflicts harm on the community. I appreciate this requires unpacking as the structure of the Islamic society is different from a liberal one. Liberals will contend by rejecting the application of the harm principle, this application of the harm principle. Our response is that they have metaphysical and social assumptions which we can prove false. Okay, that's fair. The debate now becomes centered around the idea of the existence of hell and our view of society. If true, and we can prove them to be true, the harm principle renders apostasy laws as coherent and moral. Right. So, Kylie, I'd let you speak here.
Yeah. Yeah. So my contention is basically with where he says that apostasy law, or sorry, apostasy in Islam is considered as great harm to the society and the individual who leaves Islam. For instance, hell is a great harm to the individual, the final abode of apostates. And allowing people to leave Islam without mechanism to prevent them could lead to social fragmentation. Now, uh, my question is, and I think I'll need to explain this a bit, what I'm trying to say. What is the harm actually? So he mentions two people who might get harm, right? Two groups of people. So the individual who is actually leaving or apostatizing, and the society at large. So the person who's leaving, he's harmed because he would end up in hell. That is the harm that he can that can be inflicted, or that he can face. And the society, what harm does the society face? It says that there is a fragmentation of the Muslim social group. What does that mean? Is he saying that? Can you guys explain? What do you think? What he might be
I
pointing
think
towards
what
in this
he's
statement?
thinking over here is that that's gonna propel more and more people into
Exactly. I think that's
thinking
what it's
about,
trying to say.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
I
yeah.
think this is exactly what he's trying to say. So in both
Mm.
cases, what he's trying to say is that the person who is leaving, he not only he would end up in hell, rather the society at large, there would be other people who might get some sort of encouragement or a nudge or a push towards leaving
Influenced
Islam
by
as well.
him into,
They might be
yeah,
influenced as well towards
yeah.
leaving Islam, and that's why this is the kind of harm, a great harm that can be caused by that person or individual apostatizing, and therefore there should be a mechanism to prevent this from happening. Now, just if we just dig a little deeper, the logic that he's trying to employ and how fallacious and invalid it would render even his own, I would say, reason or even his religion. Because if that is the kind of uh, logic or that's the kind of beliefs that he has about how a person's beliefs work and how people will be sent to hell, I think this puts a big question mark on his religion as well. Why do I say that? Now, he says that this punishment for apostasy prevents the individual from leaving Islam. Does it, and indirectly, and then accordingly, subsequently, he protects him from hell as well? How does that make sense? Are you saying that a person who just does not leave Islam because there is a worldly punishment that he might face,
Exactly.
just because he's a Muslim or
And
he
even in
stays or
his heart,
decides to be, exactly,
even in
if he
his heart, he
decides
might be, he might have
upon apostate, yeah,
apostatized basically,
yeah,
right? But
how
by
does that protect him
by the
from hell?
fear, right? Yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
that's a fallacious argument,
Yeah,
pretty much.
are you saying that such a person is protected from hell? Is that the kind of justice that your God is going to have or show in the afterlife, that a person who just did not leave Islam because of a worldly punishment that he might have faced, just he was believing in Islam just because of that, and you're saying, okay, so he was a true believer and therefore he deserves to go into heaven? Is that the kind of justice that your religion actually, or the kind of justice that you believe in,
And
and the
by
kind of
saying
justice that your God has?
and by saying that, you are admitting that your God doesn't know what's in your heart, basically. So he's not all knowing, pretty much, in a
Exactly. In
sense.
a way that would indicate it. And
Yeah.
now, and another problem is, and it's in a way, when he said that it applies to, it can cause a harm to society as well. And I've seen not just Hamza, because I think that's what he's referring to, and you've also sort of agreed with me on this, that what he's referring to is that a person apostatizing would lead other people or might influence other people to leave Islam as well. Now, if he believes that, and he thinks that this is harmful because of the fact that such people, after getting influenced, would leave Islam and therefore would end up in hell, the question again arises: are you saying that the people whose faith or whose Islam or belief in Islam is so weak that mere influence by an apostate would render them or would influence them or cause them to leave Islam, such people are protected by this mechanism of worldly punishment, right? Also, so Islamic, this punishment of apostasy, for apostasy, protects these people from even being exposed to the possibility that people can leave Islam, and hence they stay protected and do not even consider the possibility. And people of such weak faith, they, as a result of this, are able to go to heaven, a place where, along with the people who are true, sincere, and strongly believe in Islam. So what you're saying is, in other words, what you're saying is that so just imagine, just let me explain this a bit. There can be two kinds of people, right? People who, and I'm talking about this from within the Islamic perspective, okay? So from a Muslim's perspective, there can be only two kinds of people: a person who's sincere and a person who's not sincere. A person who's sincere deserves to be to have to get guidance from God and to stay a Muslim, or to be a Muslim and to stay a Muslim, and therefore accordingly to end up in heaven. A person who's not sincere, who's not a true seeker, should not or does not deserve to even get guidance, and therefore should not does not deserve to stay a Muslim, and therefore should end up in hell. Now, if there are only these two kinds of people in a society, or in a world, sincere and insincere,
Yeah, in a Muslim
if
society, in a
in a
Muslim
Muslim society or any
milieu,
society, right?
basically, right?
Now,
Yeah.
if you're saying that through this punishment of apostasy, you are protecting the iman of those insincere people who are only Muslim because they have not been exposed to non-Muslims, or to the ideas of non-Muslims, or to the possibility that people can leave Islam, do you think that this is the only thing that would help them to go to heaven? Is that the kind of justice that your God has, or will God, your God will show? I mean, it's if this is not injustice, I'm not sure what is. You're saying that
I think
people
this.
with such weak iman can end up in hell or in heaven just because they were not even exposed to this possibility of non-belief or leaving Islam. Then I mean, what is the point? Then you're saying that now you have sort of. You believed, according to your Hamza's belief, or people who believe in Hamza's logic, that a person's faith or hell or heaven can be dependent on things that are not in his own control, because his environment is not a person's environment is not in his own control, and therefore a person who ends up living in a place, let's say there are two persons who have equal level of weak iman, but one person ends up being born to a family who lives in the western country. Let's say he's a Muslim as well, and another person who grows up in a Muslim society. Now, a person who grows up in a Muslim society is protected from all these other ideas, criticism against Islam, apostates. He never apostatizes because he has never been exposed to those ideas. And another person who's born up, who's brought up in a western country, and has been exposed to apostasy and criticism against Islam, he, although having the same level of iman, just because he's been exposed to those ideas, he ends up leaving Islam. Now, you are saying, according to Hamza's belief, a person who's brought up in Western society would end up leaving Islam, and therefore now deserves hell. But a person who's brought up in a Muslim society, he, because he was not exposed to those ideas, now will end up in heaven. So this is the kind of justice that this God has, of this Islamic God has. So I think this should be a clear objection against Islam. Not only just Hamza's response, there's an objection against Islam.
Yes, exactly. Right. I think one can even question. Rather, it's not a very similar situation, basically, but one can question if you can not have an apostate in a society because he's a bad influence. Basically, I think probably even Mahadin mentioned this in one of his write-ups when we were discussing this topic. So probably Mahadin is going to clarify it further. But just the point, basically, that if one can be influenced by apostates, why not they can be influenced by other, and you also mentioned this, Khali, by Christians, Jews, or Hindus, or people
Yeah,
of other faiths, basically? Then do they also deserve to be punished
no.
by
They
similar kind of? This
I think,
then you either live in a completely Muslim society
yeah,
or do not live in any either.
in
I mean,
complete
don't
silos,
live in
yeah.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think the kind of safeguard they had in earlier times, I think the law is still is believed to be true in Islam, is that in a true Islamic state, other religions will not be allowed to propagate their faith to Muslims or to any other one. They can have their children follow the same religion, but they cannot propagate their faith. So, in a way, they could protect their children and the Muslims in their society from other religions through that means. That is one possibility. But yes, I do agree that that is one of the problems
But
that they might face.
then
But that's still the case, right? Still the
but then
case. Majority of
Still
the
the case.
countries, yeah, still the
Exactly.
case.
Still the case.
Majority of the countries, right?
But then the apostasy law should have not been there, because apostates could also just keep quiet, right? Yeah,
Yes, of course.
yeah,
Yeah, they can keep it. Yeah.
yeah. So that's my. So I don't think. So here's some of the issues. So here's some of the issues with what I think with this particular point, right? So he's trying to explain it through the harm principle lens, and he's trying to say that obviously liberals won't agree with it, but that's because they don't agree with the concept of hell. They don't agree with the concept of non-Muslims. Becoming a non-Muslim is a dangerous reality for society, because it leads to the potentiality to go to hell. And if you smuggle in those assumptions and accept them, maybe through other forms of arguments, the reality of a hell, the reality of these things, then it obviously makes sense through the lens of a harm principle. In other words, just like right now, we don't have the right to, let's say, lock somebody up if he's walking down the road, because he's not harming anybody. But if in an alternative reality where if you walk down the road, each time it killed 10 people, well, now you have, now you smuggled in some assumptions that that reality exists, where you walk down the road and it kills 10 people. Well, if you walk down the road and by your walking down the road, it kills 10 people each time for every 10 yards, then that's a pretty good reason maybe to intervene and interrupt your walking, and maybe develop some sort of law that can minimize the impact that you could have, maybe, whatever. But that seems to be a very strong reason for the state to intervene. So he's trying to think about it like that. So if you assume the existence of hell, then obviously leaving Islam will lead to fragmentation of the ummah, right? Now, here's my objections to this. Where is the empirical evidence of this? I'm not saying it can happen sometime, but is there this significant link between Muslims leaving and it propelling a very significant percentage boost of other Muslims leaving? Is this more stronger than other forms of influences in society? Is this a real sort of threat? And the reason I say that is because if he's going to look at it through the lens of the harm principle, he has to articulate which harm principle he's talking about, because there's various different versions of the harm principle. Most forms of harm principle that are in active application in most states, for example, they're quite nuanced, right? Let me just give you the one that I know from Europe and the UK, for example. Yeah, the UK government can make laws in order to take away certain liberties in the event, like I said before, it is proportionate to do so. That harm must outweigh the liberty that you have significantly. If it's a significant enough, then they can create that law. But before they can do in the proportionality assessment, they have to show, for example, that the harm that would come from your exercising your liberty, there's a link between there's a link between the activity of your liberty, the manifestation of your liberty, and the harm. If you can't show a link, it's called the rational connection test. Or is there a rational connection between the two actions, right? The two things, the liberty that you're trying to express and the harm. So you have to show a rational connection between Muslims departing and there being this kind of widespread fragmentation. But remember, it's saying fragmentation. Once you've demonstrated that there is a connection, right? Does that connection necessarily mean that it leads to widespread defragmentation of the society? So not defragmentation, but fragmentation of the society? Maybe not, right? And that's important because then it, again, from the paradigm of the harm principle I'm talking about, the final stage again is proportionality, where you have to show that the societal harm is so onerous, so devastating, that taking that liberty away, it outweighs it, right? When the coronavirus happened, the liberty to go to the gym was stripped because people were dying at large numbers, and if it went uncurbed, hospitals will be maximized and there'll be significant number of deaths, significant number of deaths, to such an extent that they thought it outweighs that liberty that people have to go to the gym and work out, because you can exercise that liberty elsewhere. You can do it somehow through a gym in your house. You can go for walks and runs. Most forms of gym activity is extra work rather than necessary exercise, or bodybuilding, which is not necessarily health related, is aesthetic, and all this stuff. You can re-simulate the gym at home. So death really did outweigh something like exercise of that nature in a gym. So Hamza would have to show that the actual social reality that he's talking about, there's a rational connection between the two, and then it's so widespread that it justifies killing individuals, right? Not every collective harm is so strong and widespread that it requires killing somebody to stop it, right? Littering, is a societal harm, right? But does it damage society to such an extent? Is it proportionate? Do you need to kill the person who litters in order to prevent, even if you needed it? Let me put it better. Even if you needed to kill somebody to stop the littering, is the harm so widespread to society that it justifies the death? A lot of people would say that it's not. It's disproportionate of an action. And so, and under this lens of the harm principle, people could say, many scholars would say, many lawyers would say, many philosophers would say that on the idea that people will go to hell, or some people might go to hell, it has to be so much more onerous. It has to be a lot of people going to hell, to justify the death and killing of some people leaving Islam. Before I finish, the final thing I'd say that before you even get to the proportionality exercise, there's something called necessary, right? In other words, let me go back to the littering stuff, right? Yes, you have the individual right to eat food and stuff, but if you start littering, it harms society, and on aggregate, people littering can have an effect on the environment, so you need laws to curb it. Now, we can think of, to simplify, we can think of two laws. Let's work with two laws to curb this behavior. One is, you drag people out of their homes who littered and you brutally torture them, right? That's one way to do it. There's another way to do it, maybe a fine. And let's just say that the fine is almost as impactful, if not, maybe sometimes more impactful, but almost as impactful, if not the same as torturing somebody. If you can show that a less intrusive punishment, a less severe punishment can suffice, then under this paradigm of the harm principle, you can't endorse a more severe punishment. In other words, if you want to take this liberty away, which is littering, right? Or it could be any other liberty, but you're taking away with a very, very onerous rule, like a very onerous invasion of that liberty, let's say through torture or something. If you could do it the most minimally, in the least intrusive way, you ought to opt for that. This is actually what I'm articulating is the current proportionality test within European human rights law and UK law. And to some extent, this is echoed in American law. To some extent, it's different words, different terminologies, a little bit different, right? And here's the argument that in application with apostasy, if there is a threat if there's a threat of apostasy that leads to, for example, societal fragmentation, where apostates leaving, there's a rational connection between that. Empirically, you can demonstrate that people will leave the faith, and this would mean there's a rise of ex-Muslims and they were going to go to hell, etc. This is so widespread that we need to do something about it. That, etc. If you can show, for example, an alternative method to remedy that, then you can't justify death. And I argue that Hamza's not done any of that. And I don't think any Muslim to this date has done any of that. If you're going to be talking about harm principle, then you're going to end up with people like me saying stuff like this, right? Right? You can't just say this. Right. Because I know, for example, there is a proven, demonstrated way of curbing certain views. In the UK, for example, extremist radical views by, let's say, ISIS supporters have been curbed by cutting off many channels of communication, by stopping the glorification through the terrorism act of those acts, by de-radicalization programs, which have some, empirical studies backing it, suggesting it works, and slowly it chipped away at the spread and influence of ISIS ideology, right? It is not the case that it is not the case that the UK government need to do, unlike some other governments, which
willy-nilly kill those and then implement those. Yeah,
why can't that apply in this context?
exactly.
If you go through a liberal harm principle paradigm, then you end up with these problems, which is that when you say the harm principle, again, apply the added element of the least intrusive punishment or measure in order to curb the alleged problem in society. This is a less intrusive measure, and therefore it doesn't justify the death penalty. So those are the things that I would say to that, and I don't think Hamza's opening a can of worms about things.
Yeah, Mahaden, I'm just taking your point further, Mahaden, and probably you already mentioned it. See, if you're here in terms of harm principle, even if you're talking about this particular ideology, I mean, what you're doing is probably doing this capital punishment on just apostasy might even be detrimental in a sense that you won't know, but large portion of those who believe, basically, after you have given capital punishment to a few of those who have apostatized, basically, they might just be believing in that ideology or that religion, or that their belief might just be based on that fear and not true love for God, basically. And more such people will come out and think that, oh, okay, I have to just believe, not truly because I believe, because of the fear of that, being killed for that belief. Basically, if they are not, they come out as apostates, basically, right? And secondly, if you think your ideology is superior, basically you can prove it with all those arguments, as he mentions in point number 6, probably, I think, right? That we have all the means to, prove it. If it were so easy to do that, right? Then why would you need that capital punishment? Why won't you just, as you said, do it a simpler way rather than convince them, right? That these are the ways you can think of it. Why our ideology is right? Why Islam is the true religion? The God exists. Quran is from Allah, and all those things. Messengers are true, and all these things are true. We can verify that. We can test that. We have the evidence, solid evidence, right? If it's that easy, that's the probably simpler route rather than going through this fear tactic, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, that is the modern day application of the harm, thing. I mean, in order to understand, in order to balance between exactly what Hamza was talking about, in order to balance between individual rights and societal protection from harms that emanate from misuse or misapplication, or even the actual exercise of the individual right, we try to put it through the lens of these human rights standards, which is that there's first identifying there's a harm that emerges from it, right? That there's a connection between the activity and the harm. That any laws that we design in order to stop that harm, it's the most minimally intrusive one. So we can balance the individual's right as much as possible, protect and preserve the individual right as much as possible, and only design laws that are enough to deal with the matter, right? And then we also ask, if there is a law that, even if after taking all those measures into account or performing all those tasks, is it really proportionate? Is the harm to society such a dangerous one that it outweighs that individual person's right? And I think that's how we should be thinking about it. And it makes complete sense. And it's not one that we just elevate the individual willy-nilly over the state. And it's not one where the state willy-nilly gets elevated either. It's a very, very sophisticated philosophical exercise, to some extent deontological, to some extent utilitarian, and one that marries both precepts together to some extent. And this dispels all these accusations that Hamza, I mean, it is somewhat accusatory at the beginning, at point 6, where he's saying that we don't look at life through an individualistic lens. Well, we don't either. Secularists don't either, right? Even secular philosophers don't either. In theory, they don't. In practice, they don't. Lawyers don't either. And I submit that he's not done anything to show that it coheres with the harm principle. You don't just say it; you have to show it, right? Do you know when the COVID-19 thing happened? There's so much literature, so much illegal work doing exactly what I'm talking about, explaining how the COVID-19 measures were justified. It was proportionate. Was it necessary to do so? Was it the least intrusive measure? Does the empirical evidence suggest there's a link between, let's say, masks and the reduction of harm, right? Is there a link between the COVID virus and the threat of hospitals becoming the maximum capacity of hospitals being reached, exceeding it, and that it justified the laws to curb it? Is very, very intricate step-by-step arguments. Yeah, it's quite beautiful, really.
And with proper evidence, basically. It's not just willy-nilly somebody saying it, and
Yeah.
One very fundamental. Madan, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, what Hamza is doing, he's just saying it that it conforms with the harm principle. Yeah, no, it doesn't. And if he thinks that just by proving the Quran it does all the work, it doesn't either. You still have to show that it confirms with the harm principle by showing the empirical evidence. What he might want to do is smuggle it in through the back door by saying God said so and God knows more. That it coheres with the harm principle, but in a way, but obviously we can't prove it all through empirical evidence. That is the least minimal measure or whatever, God knows how it's just moral. But by saying that, does he really need to explain? Does he even need to say the harm principle? Does he even, you can get rid of it all and say God knows.
Yeah, Madan, I'd like to make another point here, which is probably relating to the same topic, but with this law in particular and not relating to Hamza's tweet particular. And what I'm saying is asking our Muslim brothers to think through it, basically, that where would this kind of a law come from? An all-wise God who knows that apostatizing is not going to influence somebody, and even if somebody believes in his own heart, that's not a big problem, because that person who has apostatized, if such a God exists, he's going to punish him for eternity in the hellfire anyways, right? So at least let him live this life. But or from a ruler who wants to protect his society, his rule, his society for his imperial goals, basically, right? So they have to think through it, basically, where these kind of rulings might come from. Not probably from an all-wise God, probably, right? Why would we do that? But anyways, that will take us to a very digressing point. But Kelly, are you back? Kelly is not back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay. So before if you want to make a point, give me just 1 minute or 2 minutes before that. What I'm going to do is plug in our English only channel. Anybody who's listening as of now and loves to listen to us talking in English, basically, and tackling these philosophical arguments, deep philosophical arguments in English, please subscribe to our English only channel, Unveiling Faith. It's going in the banner underneath that you can see. And also we have memberships for you guys to join. If you want to support us, you can do super chats, or whatever means you can support us, basically. Please do, if you are able to do. If you can't support us financially, monetarily, support us by spreading our channel, joining our English only channel, letting others know, basically, liking, sharing, commenting. Commenting helps a lot, basically. At least YouTube sees it, and then the algorithms highlights the video, basically. So you can help us that way as well. Anything I have left? Basically, we have a Buy Me a Coffee at /Philosapiens, as well as Patreon /Philosapiens, right? If you want to support us there, you can do that as well. But yeah, I mean, if you can't do that, make sure that you like and subscribe to our English only channel. All right, guys, go ahead. Kelly, you had something to add to.
No, I think I agree with Mahadin. and I don't have anything further to add on this.
All right. So what I have done is I have made. I don't think we have too many watching us as of now. Maybe they'll come later. But whoever is watching, if they want to join and say a few things, if they have in mind, they want to. If they want to criticize our take on Hamza's tweets, they can come and tell us why they disagree with us, or if they have any other question, they might join us and tell us, ask any question. Pretty much, right? I think, yeah, we haven't seen quite a few regulars. Major Reynolds is not there. Cosmic has disappeared pretty much, and today we don't have our own very member. Ugba is not here.
I think people are one by one being kidnapped. Maybe
Yeah,
go first.
or
Now
they have expressed their apostasy.
maybe.
All right, guys, you can see the StreamYard link if you want to join. Please do. And apart from that, I think maybe we could have maybe Hamza could have explained his points a little bit better. But our arguments, I think, our counter arguments to his points stand. I think by and large, at least the last point, harm principle. I think we have a fair objection to it, pretty much.
Yeah. In the end, he's going to devolve to saying God knows more. So in the sense, it is part of the harm principle. But God knows how it's harmful and how it is.
Yeah, I think yeah.
And reality is, if an apostate leaves Islam, most people would not shudder at all. Maybe a minority of apostates leaving, of the nature of their leaving, departure, the nature of their expression would have an effect. But even is that going to have a massive effect on increasing the increasing the numbers of people leaving from Islam? Again, I suspect not. Yeah, and even if you have like a law that
I mean,
tries to
even if it does, I think you have better ways to deal with it, as we argued, right? I think.
like I said, yeah.
If your ideology is that weak that it's gonna be harmed by people leaving it,
Even
basically,
a
then it wasn't strong in the very first place, basically.
even a Chinese type of Uyghur internment camp type of thing would be possibly a less onerous invasion of the person's liberty, right?
Right.
And that would help, or at least you're not killing them, right? I mean, there's obviously arguments that the Uyghur population are being killed, but there are a lot of people are put in these educational camps. Even that would be maybe a better alternative than hanging in the apostate, and killing them. So, yeah, go on.
I think one more point could be added, since you brought in the Uyghurs of China, basically, right? So I'm pretty sure everybody knows who are Uyghurs of China. Basically, what is that province? Xianjing or something like that. Xianjing or something like that. That's the province where the majority of Uyghurs live, pretty much, right? And the point I'm trying to make is, once you say that somebody living in West or secular society cannot criticize an Islamic law, as was posited by Hamza, and he gives a reason for it. Basically, he says that because we believe that it's the truth and every other faith is wrong. But then, from the same token, if some other country is implementing a law, basically, let's say if China is implementing laws for Uyghurs that they can't even build their mosques, basically, then probably you don't have any right to criticize them as well, because you think that somebody criticized from the secular world can't criticize Islamic laws and apostasy laws, pretty much, right? So that's kind of the symmetry that you have to respect for consistency's sake, in a sense.
Yeah. I think Kylie's gonna need to go, so maybe you want to tell the audience that.
All right. Okay. Yeah, I think we're done for the stream. It was a nice stream, Madan, Kelly. Any final points you want to add, Kelly, Madan?
No. I thought Kylie might just go, but okay, that's all right. I mean, we can close the stream. I think we're done with most of the points.
Yeah, I think we'll close the stream. Let it be short and sweet, under 2.5 hours, right? Kelly, you
Yeah.
have anything to add as closing remarks?
No, I think I have said what I wanted to say during the stream, so nothing more.
All right. Okay. All right, everybody. It was a nice stream. Nice talking to you all, guys. Talking in front of you all, guys, basically. And like, subscribe, and share as much as you can. Thanks to my co-hosts, Mahaden and Kali. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.